So welcome to the second annual GNET conference. I'm Chelsea Daymon. I'm so happy to have all of you here and also to be in London, of course. And we are doing a panel 3, and we are talking about methods for strategic intervention. We have all of these speakers. We do have one that's coming in virtually, so we will hopefully not have any technical difficulty. But this is a really important topic, and I'm sure some of you that might have tuned into the first talk yesterday, and then the talks that will be continuing on this day, we'll see a lot of things about content online and different things to do with extremist use of technology. But I think this panel is really important because we're going to be talking about intervention and countering this. So I'm very happy to have a fantastic panel of speakers to talk about this from multiple different areas and different expertise. So we're going to start off first with Craanen, and she's from Tech Against Terrorism, and she will be talking about terrorist content and their analytical platform at Tech Against Terrorism. So Anna, I will hand over the floor to you.
My name's Anna. I'm a senior research analyst at Tech Against Terrorism, and I'm also the policy lead on the TCAP. So I'll be talking about that a bit more today, so thank you so much for having me and listening. I'm not sure if I'm getting a clicker or if that's the clicker. Let's see how this works. Does that work? Yes, it works. So just as a reminder to anyone who's unfamiliar with Tech Against Terrorism, so we're a public-private partnership that supports the global tech sector in countering terrorist use of the internet whilst respecting human rights. And we do that with basically everyone. We work with all stakeholders. So first of all, we obviously work with the GIFCT. We organize webinars with them and focus on the knowledge sharing and mentorship with them. But as Tech Against Terrorism, we've really seen that, as bigger platforms have taken action, there's been a massive migration to smaller tech companies, and we particularly support them because they often don't have the resources or capacity to deal with that exploitation, meaning that terrorist content is more likely to stay online, which is obviously an issue. We also work with governments, so the government of Canada actually sponsored the TCAP, and we also work with, basically any government that wants to do this democratically and based on the rule of law. Finally, obviously we're here, we work with civil society and academia. With civil society, we work with them because as we talk about content moderation, we obviously run into risks to freedom of expression and other digital rights. So therefore, by working with them, we try and mitigate against that as much as possible. And with academia, we obviously want to make sure that we are up to speed with all the latest research. We also want to co-publish research. And obviously also, and the TCAP plays a vital role in this, provide a way for academics to get access in an ethical and secure way to terrorist content for more evidence-based research. So in terms of just a quick overview in terms of our 3 work streams, and I'll glance over this. So first of all, what we do is we analyze the threat. So we conduct open source intelligence analysis and see who's being exploited, who is doing the exploitation. So is it far-right groups, is it Islamist actors, is it violent incels? Basically, we analyze that. Then we kind of take them over to the second work stream, which is where we provide more practical support and basically raise awareness. So for example, we have the knowledge sharing platform that we've built for platforms. It's also where our mentorship program is, the webinars that we organize together with the GIFCT, and basically more of our awareness raising. Then thirdly, at Tech Against Terrorism, we also work with developers, so we are actually able to build our own tools, and the Terrorist Content Analytics Platform, or the TCAP, is an example of that. So in terms of the problem set, so just to hammer this one more time, so we've seen that as bigger tech companies actually, have taken action, there's a lower concentration of terrorist content on these platforms, but where there is terrorist content, it's often with a higher sophistication level of content avoidance, moderation avoidance, and we've seen that smaller tech companies have a greater amount of content on there, but it is often less hidden. Because they, as I said, smaller tech companies often don't have the ability to detect it in the first place. So this is really what the TCAP was aiming to address, the smaller tech companies that are having difficulties identifying the content and then moderating it. So in terms of the Terrorist Content Analytics Platform, so basically you can see it here, and I'll add these as well because that might be easier. But the main screenshot, you can see what the TCAP actually looks like. So what we do is basically the TCAP, it alerts tech companies with terrorist content when we find it on their platforms. And how this works is basically we have open source intelligence analysts, basically look online find terrorist content, and then from those we take the URLs, because the TCAP is actually a URL sharing platform. So we take the URLs, and we also rely on automated scrapers to do this as well. And again, from that, the URLs we'll take out. We'll then verify them according to scope. So we need to see that the URL is actually produced by a designated entity in scope, and I'll come to that in a second. So we verify those, then we classify them, so we give them labels, which terrorist group actually created the content, does it have PII, is it very graphic, to make sure that a content moderator has a warning. We then submit them to the TCAP. The TCAP then automatically hashes these URLs, and we want to begin sharing these with the GIF-CT hash sharing consortium, hopefully this year. And we also then archive the content, and then we alert these to the platforms, and then we measure when they are taken offline, because that's how we measure our success, what amount of content goes offline following our alerts. So in terms of the designation point, so we've grounded the TCAP in the rule of law by following designation lists by democratic nation states and supranational institutions. So here you can see the Islamist entities in scope for now. We are planning a massive expansion actually over the summer. But for now, ISIS, Al-Qaeda, official affiliates, and the Taliban are in scope, and you can see there's great consensus. Now, when we come to the far right, it's obviously there's a lot less groups and a lot less consensus. And this is a massive issue, and we, as Tech Against Terrorism, always encourage governments to designate entities. So here you can see all the far-right groups in scope. Also importantly, though, because we want the TCAP to be as effective for the far-right as it is for the Islamist actors, we also support the Christchurch call to action, meaning that we alert the material produced by the perpetrator. We also alert the manifesto by the Norway attacker following the New Zealand Classification Office's banning of this material. And as of 2 days ago, we also now include the Buffalo attack perpetrators manifesto and live stream, and are alerting this to platforms. And I think since yesterday, we've alerted 69 URLs so far. And again, this follows the classification office. In total, though, so we launched in November 2020 with our alerts. In total, we've submitted over 30,000 URLs containing terrorist content, and of those, we've alerted 17,000 to 70 tech companies. Overwhelmingly, we've seen that 92% has been taken down, which we want to get higher, but obviously it's a great statistic, and it really shows that when you help these smaller tech companies practically, they do want to work with us and actually, help us do this. So in terms of just, and I'll keep it brief, but in terms of how we support research and academia, so we are building an archive of terrorist content. That is quite the job, though, so yeah, stay with us on that. But we have been producing some data, so we've just written our first transparency report of the first year of the TCAP, which contains all our metrics and policies. And some interesting, we've drawn interesting conclusions as to where most terrorist content is actually located, what type of platforms, and also this example that I wanted to mention. So as you can see, we've alerted far more Islamist material than far-right material. This is based on a number of reasons. It's because the dissemination techniques are quite different, so the far-right often posts content in-app, so like a magazine or a poster, whilst Islamist actors actually produce massive lists of URLs. And that is very good for URL sharing for the TCAP. It's also the difference in designation. It's also the volume of official propaganda. And, that designation is less of a good framework to use, really, for the far right. So this is a massive issue. But what we can say is that from the alerts, we've seen that for Islamist actors, 94% of the content has been taken down by tech companies, compared to 50% for the far right. And I think this is a really interesting metric, because often I think we all know that far right content is taken down less, but we now have it in a number. And whilst the sample size is small, we want to expand this, and then hopefully we'll have a more reliable conclusion. We've also seen the platform types that get exploited. So interestingly, Islamist terrorist groups exploit a way larger plethora of platforms than far-right terrorist groups. Again, I think this is because Islamist terrorist groups they've basically been disrupted to a greater extent than far-right terrorist groups. So they simply don't have to use as many platforms as Islamist actors. So obviously there's room for growth there. Finally, we've supported one paper with the Resolve Network, where Tech Against Terrorism did analysis on Telegram channels, and also was part of the Terrorist Content Analytics Platform, so the TCAP. And they focused on file-sharing platforms, and they've published this paper where they basically have come up with a strategy: remove, impede, disrupt, and redirect, which basically is one way to deal with this type of material as well. So I just finished with, if you are an academic who wants to look at this data, everything is on our website, terrorismanalytics.org, or you can get in touch and we can see if we can give you more access to data as of yet. With that, I'll finish for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So our second speaker will be Mike Burgess, and he is from Moonshot, and he will be talking about online intervention with a focus on the Western Balkans. So take it away, Mike.
Thank you very much. Perfect, thanks. Thank you very much, everyone. Good morning. A pleasure and a privilege to be here, to be invited to speak and contribute to this conference, and this panel in particular, discussing strategic interventions. And may I say what a refreshing change it is to be here in person, do something like this once again with real people in a room. It's obviously been a challenging and distressing week for those of us who work in this field, given the tragic events in Buffalo. Obviously our thoughts are with the families, emergency service personnel involved. So what a pleasure it is then to be able to focus on something a little more positive in this forum, discussing how we can best reach individuals vulnerable to violent extremism and radicalization violence with meaningful interventions, while of course continuing to acknowledge significant challenges that we face as practitioners and as researchers. For those of you not familiar with Moonshot and what we do, we have the unashamedly ambitious ambition of a mission to work to end online harms, applying ethics, evidence, and human rights. We're a social impact company founded in 2015 to build solutions to violent extremism. But since then, Moonshot has expanded the scope of what we do and the harms that we tackle. And today, in addition to violent extremism, we work to better understand and disrupt disinformation networks, gender-based violence, child sexual abuse and exploitation, organised crime, and other harms. We work with global brands, governments, NGOs, and tech companies, big and small, to deliver evidence-based solutions. And if I could just squeeze in that we're absolutely delighted this year to be named by Fast Company as one of the 10 most innovative companies in the security sector. Now to the focus of today's panel, methods for strategic intervention. And I just want to discuss one such method that we have developed and implemented in different parts of the world, our online interventions model. And in a nutshell, it's about identifying and understanding where users are seeking and engaging with harmful content, building digital campaigns to reach those audiences, disrupting the journeys, and providing safer, alternative online destinations. Not only that, but at those destinations, providing options for individuals to engage with tailored services, importantly, on their terms. And perhaps working with those services to help address some of the underlying vulnerabilities that may factor into their susceptibility to online harms. Broadly speaking, our online interventions programs follow the same model/approach, regardless of geography or ideology, though of course each is shaped by the contextual factors in play. And first, it's about understanding the context, conducting investigative research and scoping to inform project design, and in the interventions approach, gathering and analysing data, insights and narratives, relevant online spaces and platforms, and indicators of risk. And then partnering with and building the capacity of local interventions organisations, and where appropriate and necessary, help to build their capacity to better understand and support individuals vulnerable to violent extremism and other online harms. Acknowledging that in the vast majority of cases, local organisations are absolutely the best institutions to effectively provide sustained and effective effective engagement with vulnerable individuals. And then we design and build tailored online referral pathways, creating bespoke online referral pathways to reach and engage individuals online across relevant platforms, deploying tailored audience messaging to support this endeavour in engaging the audience, and using methodologies such as the redirect method. And then lastly, connecting those individuals with support services, using different approaches to connect those individuals with providers, and that might involve text messaging-based support, either through SMS or a messaging application, video conferencing, or even telehealth where appropriate. And this is all on a completely voluntary basis, of course. So, by way of an example, I just want to touch briefly now on a pilot project that we carried out in the Western Balkans, where we successfully employed the online intervention methodology to reach individuals vulnerable to a specific violent extremism And forgive me for not being too detailed in some of my descriptions here. While not an ongoing project, some of this work is still extant, so we want to protect those involved. So employing the approach that we covered a moment ago, once we understood where the online individuals were seeking to find, engage, and spread violent extremist content, we built out an online intervention program to engage those audience, looking to disrupt the journey they were on and provide online referral pathways to spaces that we had jointly designed and created with our interventions partners. These destinations hosted both tailored bespoke content for the audience and options to connect with a local interventions partner who was suitably trained to engage with those who may be vulnerable to violent extremism in that geography, providing psychosocial support, among other things. And I want to emphasize here the importance of working with the right intervention services in designing and delivering these types of programs. They are absolutely crucial in that regard, and they add so much value, and the partner selection process is a key element of this approach. So the individuals in the Western Balkans, on choosing to voluntarily engage with the project's referral pathway, reached different destinations that we designed, and they included tailored branding, created specifically to appeal to this audience, clear messages around the offer, the main ones in this case being that this was something that was free, at the point of need, confidential, and supportive in nature. And alongside the information on the services available, the platforms hosted and tailored multimedia content, which we both created and curated, and the option to engage with the service provider via messaging applications, depending on the platform we play. Audience messaging in the campaigns focused mainly on potential underlying grievances and vulnerabilities identified during the research and scoping phase of the pilot. And we found actually that those messages that focused on feelings of uncertainty, feelings of being stuck in a situation or specific environment, and a search for meaning gained the most traction with the at-risk audience. And one approach we took was to focus on emotion-based messaging to see if that had resonance. In the course of the pilot, we witnessed a conversion rate of around 1%, so around 1 in 100 visitors that came to the platform through the referral pathways that went on to view content in some way, actually then chose to engage voluntarily with the intervention service, whether that was inquiring about the service, exchanging messages with the psychosocial counsellors, or entering into some form of sustained support through a number of online sessions with the counselling service. And over a few short months, the pilot program recorded over 800 messages from potentially vulnerable individuals. We saw 19 self-referrals and 7 sustained engagements via online support sessions. Now, acknowledge that these are small numbers in absolute terms, but this was a pilot project in a region of the Western Balkans with a relatively small population, and remembering that we're micro-targeting people here, so it's only those individuals that were having online behaviour that demonstrated an appetite for violent extremism, which considered in scope and therefore targeted through digital campaigns. And each of those people, each person who engaged in some way with those services may have ultimately in some way gone to engage in online and offline harms, and their future might look different as a result of engaging with the project and these services. I very much appreciate this is a relatively brief look at one way of doing online interventions. There's of course a hell of a lot more to this in terms of design and implementation of these kinds of programs. We don't have time to go into here today, but hopefully this has served as an insightful example of what's possible. And certainly what we've learned in the Western Balkans and elsewhere we've delivered this kind of programming is that this approach, carefully and sensitively designed and implemented, can absolutely safeguard online spaces and vulnerable individuals who've been able to get the support they need that they otherwise may not have got, and this is where the largest impact can be found. Thanks very much for your time.
So moving away from the Western Balkans, we are now going to focus on Indonesia, and Cameron Sumpter over here will be talking about this, and he is from the Center of Excellence for National Security. So Cameron?
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. So yes, I am from the Center of Excellence, which is a center in a school called RSIS in Singapore. So I research and write about efforts to prevent violent extremism, mostly offline, but today I'm going to highlight 3 different online strategies in Indonesia. So hopefully my somewhat cryptic title here will be a little clearer in 8 or so minutes, but basically I want to highlight the importance of engaging people rather than just messaging them, and also linking online interventions with offline activities. So this is certainly nothing new, but I think it's worth repeating with some interesting recent examples. So just a very quick update on the situation in Indonesia. Violent extremists have been really forced onto the back foot lately. There was a surge of activity during the Caliphate years, but this provoked a pretty substantial response from the Indonesian police, who were helped by updates to anti-terrorism legislation in 2018. I think they arrested almost 400 terror suspects in 2018, and roughly 300 or so since then. Prevention programming has gotten more organized, and the prison system has improved its management of high-risk inmates, although overcrowding is still a big problem. Basically, it's just not been a great time to be a terrorist in Indonesia lately, but the movement goes back generations, and it's probably never going to fade away, especially if some of the recent excess diverts attention and resources from the problem. I thought I'd just quickly throw in a framework as well, if you don't mind. I think that the best way of looking at PCVE is through the public health model prevention framework. So basically, it's divided into 3 levels of focus. Primary efforts are aimed at the general population or certain sections of society. Secondary interventions target those who may be getting involved or showing interest. And tertiary efforts are for those who have been involved and are either in prison or reintegrating with society. So I feel like the lines between these levels are a little blurry at times, but basically the 3 examples that I'm going to give now roughly fit into these categories, which I thought could be helpful. So first, most of the primary online messaging in Indonesia now is conducted by media networks associated with Nahdlatul Ulama, which is the nation's largest Islamic organization and has tens of millions of members. They have a portal called NU Online, which involves a wide range of content, including messages promoting tolerance and some that address extremism more directly. Another primary approach comes from the National Counterterrorism Agency, which has a Young Cyber Peace Ambassador program, which they've been running for the past several years. So they encourage young people to create memes and infographics, for example, promoting an inclusive message or disputing an extremist argument. Other government agencies have similar products, and it's all very positive and constructive, but it's also pretty general and hard to evaluate. So the next example is more of a secondary intervention. Some of you may have heard of the online platform ruangobrol.id, which was set up a few years ago by PVE practitioners and researchers in Jakarta. So they aim to amplify what they call credible voices, meaning those who have personal experience with an extremist movement. But they also have a range of content aimed at engaging young people more generally. So a lot of it is also primary, but in 2019 they started an interesting 18-month experiment to identify people online that were a bit extremisty, befriend them using an alias or a fake profile, and then hopefully introduce them to mentors offline who may be a constructive influence. The team has a separate program for former prisoners, and the idea was to find people through social media who are based in the same areas and then link them up. So they started looking for people, mainly on Facebook, I think, through their posts, their friend lists, and the way that they engaged with certain threads. When they found an appropriate user, they would compliment one of their posts maybe, or play dumb and ask for more information. And they soon realized if they used an attractive female profile picture, they would be more likely to get a response for some reason. And from this, a few of the conversations then progressed to private WhatsApp and Telegram chats, as you do. And this seemed like a step in the right direction, but the platform's young analysts started getting invites to religious study circles, and some of the chats took on a bit of a romantic vibe, which made management a little nervous. One analyst in particular was forced to ghost a couple of guys until they stopped messaging because she felt unsafe. So, it was a bit hit or miss. The intention was to take things offline so that interventions could be more personal and potentially effective. But they found that it takes time to build trust, obviously, especially online, and rushing things with a catfishing strategy was probably a little risky. I've heard recently that they're trying to engage people. They're still trying to do this kind of thing, probably with more neutral avatars. It's unclear whether they've transitioned to any offline meetings, but they've learned a lot through the engagements. And these engagements, the types of reactions that they're getting, are informing the sort of substance of their content moving forward. So I really think it's a great initiative. So the third example is a group of former prisoners overseen by a counterterrorism police unit who established an organization called the Deakin Foundation just before the pandemic. The plan was to support other prisoners disengage from the extremist movement and get back on their feet when they get out of prison. So they pick them up from the prison gates, drive them back home, or organize flights back to their communities. During COVID, they helped them get PCR tests and vaccine certificates if they were flying home, and they'd put them up for a few days until those things got sorted. They've also facilitated weddings, both inside and outside prisons, and they've assisted with local vaccination drives. Early last year, they set up a poultry business to breed and sell chickens. And a few months ago, they collaborated with Panasonic for a workshop to train former prisoners in the maintenance of air conditioning units. So all of these activities are documented and posted on their media network, which you can see examples of here. A lot of it's on Instagram and Facebook, but also YouTube and Telegram. And people from their former networks have been engaging with the content, which sometimes leads to quite heated debates. So it's often pretty visceral stuff, and I think it's pretty clear by now that disagreements on social media platforms are not always the most thoughtful, reasoned discussions. But then this antagonism may actually be a good thing in this context. So my friend Jordan Newton, who really is a go-to person for online extremism in Indonesia, he argues that provoking these fiery reactions from extremists online shows that the messaging is genuinely having an impact, right? Which is important in a field where monitoring and evaluation appears to be so difficult. So the reintegration videos posted online seem to be a great byproduct of what's already a constructive offline initiative to help people get, sort their lives out and get back on their feet and potentially disengage. So I don't have much time to wrap things up, but I should just finish there by underlining the points I've tried to convey. And those are that the importance of targeted online engagement rather than just mass messaging, and the utility of mixing the offline and online, particularly when initiatives involve so-called credible voices or people who have come out the other side of an extremist movement like the Deakin guys. So thanks very much for listening.
Thank you. And actually listening to you talk about your catfish section reminds me of a lot of the things that women go through on dating apps. So with that being said, why don't we move on to you, Dr. Nawab?
Sure.
And just for our listeners and our people in the audience, Dr. Nawab Osman is here from Meta, aka Facebook. I'm just still trying to get used to saying Meta, but he'll be talking about Meta's approach to countering extremism and hate.
Right. So I know initially you wanted to sort of leave me to the last just so that we can demarcate between the academics and the tech, sort of guy. But I was from academia. I spent nearly 10 years in academia and made a shift to Meta, just slightly more than a year back. And it's always a pleasure to be with academics within academic circles like this, where you really learn quite a bit about what's happening. And essentially, coming from a tech company is often, there's a lot of press around us. And often what is being written is about how we failed in content moderation, and a lot of other things. Now, but at the same time, I think what we have also done, and this is basically what I do in Facebook, which is to look at our global programs to counter violent extremism, preventing violent extremism, but also around peace building, supporting community and social resilience, because those things are important for us. And I think the reason why we support programs, we have a number of different reasons for doing so. But I think what we believe in is whatever we're saying online is really perhaps the worst manifestation of offline developments or realities. And I think, which is why it is very crucial, I think, I think what Cameron mentioned earlier, for us to ensure that whatever we're doing online, while we're trying to keep our platform safe in terms of content moderation, countering some of these groups online, but also that we are intervening in terms of offline interventions. So some of the key objectives of our global programs is really trying to strike a balance between PCVE work and peace building, because PCVE, especially CVE itself, as an industry, has gotten some bad name to it. Certain communities might not be comfortable with the CVE approaches that we have seen that has been laid out in many different countries. And so what we're trying to do is to have a balance, because the reality is that PCVE work is extremely important. There are some realities of extremism in certain communities, and we need to do more on that front. Also, I don't think we see our role necessarily, we see our role as empowering and supporting civil society organizations that are already working in the space of PCVE, but also in terms of peace building. And we see that, while the platform has been used to do a lot of bad things, we also think that there are many very positive things that could be used. Some of these efforts could use the Meta family of apps a lot better. Educating users on some of our policy, because often we have been criticized for perhaps being a bit blunt in terms of how we are enforcing on content. Capacity building for partners, and lastly, knowledge creation. So I'm going to run through a couple of the programs that we run. The first is the Search Redirect program. This is a program that actually Moonshot developed in 2016 with Google. The whole idea here is to focus on users searching for or engaging in high-risk extremist content, and to basically offer them, a redirection towards content that is, a lot more positive, that is a lot more focused, on trying to move them away from that journey. So basically, the idea of the program, or rather the objectives of the program, are basically to create friction between at-risk users and extremist content, and also to provide an opportunity for these users to disengage with extremist content. So currently we have rolled this out in 6 markets, in Pakistan, in Indonesia, Australia, United States, United Kingdom, and Germany. So most of actually the program is focused on far-right extremism, 4 out of the 6. So Exit, our partner in the UK, Exit Hate UK, is the latest partner that we have brought on board with us. And how do we, what is this program all about? It's basically a data-driven approach where we develop key words that are often searched by individuals who are searching for extremist content. So those, the words itself, are co-developed between us and the CSO partner, in this case, in the case of the UK, Exit UK. And whenever someone searches for these words, there is an interstitial that pops out where they are told that they, that you have searched for terms that are, or words that are associated with extremism, and you have the option to click through to these resources provided by our CSO partners. And this could be in the form of a helpline, it could be in the form of search, a chat function, and also some content through videos and writings, especially for people who are involved in the extremists, were formerly involved in extremist groups. And how are we, doing this? We're also helping through our partnership with Moonshot. We help the partners before we launch the program to develop the landing page, to basically, test the effectiveness of these words. And we do a review of this every 4 months to make sure that these words are relevant, that it is, is constantly being updated, because things change really fast in the world of extremism, and we need to basically stay, abreast of what's happening. The second program I want to talk about is a program called the Resiliency Initiative, which is a partnership that we have with the Asia Foundation. So this is a program that we currently have rolled out in the Asia-Pacific region. And the idea really is to help CSOs. So we find that within the community of CSOs working to build social resilience, community resilience, countering hate and extremism, there's always been, you have certain smaller CSOs with strong grassroots network that might not be as adept in terms of using technology, right? Especially in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa and APAC. So we created this program where we run 2 sets of workshops a year for them to help them out, on how to actually use our platforms, but also how do you brand your messaging, how do you carry out a digital campaign, and so on when you are, when you are doing your work. And the second set of CSOs that we're working with are CSOs like the Nahdlatul Ulama in Indonesia, which are your grand old CSOs with massive, networks and grassroots support, but might not be, again, as adept in terms of using technology and finding themselves losing out to groups like the Hizb ut-Tahrir, for example, or some of the Islamist groups, violent Islamist groups, who are more, again, are using the online platform a lot better. We have now trained more than 100 organizations across 15 countries, including most of Southeast Asia, Central Asia, South Asia. And we are about to actually launch a similar program in Africa. So in June, end of June this year, we have collaborated with Search for Common Ground to run 4 sets of workshops across the Sub-Saharan African region, basically, with the similar approach of trying to help build up that network, empower CSOs, and so on. So as a follow-up, once you've gone through that first level of training, we also provide small grants, competitive. Not everyone gets it. If you have an idea on how you want to go about, carrying out a particular campaign, we will support that campaign. And we also want to make sure that as we are supporting some of the CSOs, that we also helping them ramp up, right? Like getting some sort of training and certification. And this is where we are supporting or sponsoring certification through the Meta Blueprint program, to get some of the CSOs, certified and for them to be able to work within the space of countering extremism in a more effective way. Have I exceeded time? I've got 2 more slides. The third program I want to talk about is the Courage program, and this is where I like this program the most because it allows me to get in touch with the academic past. The idea of the program is really for us, and we actually had a report that was launched last year called the Courage Against Hate, where we work with CSOs all across Europe to map out essentially the hate landscape in several countries within Europe, but also to feature the work of certain CSOs that are doing things in a very interesting way to counter hate in very innovative ways, with the hope that other CSOs around the world would look at this, potentially learn from those methodologies, and implement it in their respective countries. So this year, what we're doing, we are doing a very similar project, but across Asia Pacific in the Sub-Saharan Africa project, and we should the final report will be done by October of this year. And some of the one interesting program, for example, that a CSO actually used comedy, right? The use of comedy to counter hate, I think is a very interesting way, especially in societies where it's a lot harder to actually counter hate in the ways that we are doing, in perhaps Europe, United States, or Australia. Last program, and this is actually our first offline intervention. It's a program called Trita Jami. Trita is Bahasa for story, Jami is community in Swahili. And so the reason why we're doing this is because we are bringing the 2 regions in this program. So it's basically, what we're trying, the title of the program is Community of Storytellers, right? And the idea here is for us to create communities of peace builders. We are working with an organization that basically specializes in the art of digital storytelling, but also, traditional art of peace building, traditional art of dialogue, and so on. And the idea is for us to bring, CSOs from 5 countries, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, and Cameroon, where the cleavages are very different, but yet, similar in many different, in some ways. And our partner is using the trainers model to help the CSOs to deep reach, essentially, their respective communities using some of these methods that, that they have learned from, and the partner will be supporting the in-country training. The whole idea of this is that we are hoping that, we can support, as I've said, community of peace builders, people who can intervene whenever there's an actual offline violence or offline conflict taking place. I'm going to end there, and of course, welcome any questions related to my presentation.
Thank you so much. I think it's really important that we learn what the tech side is doing to counter all of these things or the programs they're offering, which is a very important thing that sometimes we overlook when we're bashing all of you. Some of the things that came up, I've been putting down some notes as we've been talking, is sort of the challenges that all of you face in intervention strategies. And I know the challenges will be different depending on what sector you're coming into, and maybe spaces to grow. Does anyone want to have a hash at that of what we could maybe be doing better as researchers or on the tech company side as well?
Well, I suppose I think the major challenge really is that to be effective, PCVE programs need to be targeted, right? As specific as possible. But because everybody's situation is quite different, then that makes it difficult, resource intensive and expensive to focus on individuals, right? So that's why I feel like it's good to have primary strategies and tertiary and secondary strategies. So that you can put some of your money on individuals, perhaps, but then spread your bets a little bit through primary initiatives to hopefully get some constructive outcomes.
I can go next. I think for us, obviously, with the terrorist content analytics platform, we try and ground it in the rule of law. Sadly, the rule of law is not that clear on terrorist content, especially when you then think of the tech sector operating on a global level. So for us, it can be very hard to provide clarity to smaller tech companies as to what they are legally required to remove. We often see, actually, that they go beyond legally required, which is obviously good. But I think for us, that's one of the main challenges and also what we want to address. So as I mentioned, designation as sort of the cornerstone for our inclusion policy, we are facing that for the far right, that is not giving us the most satisfactory results. So I think for us, it's finding legal ways to make sure that we can expand by working with governments and the tech sector together. But I think that providing clarity in that sense can be very, very hard for us. And we always say we're a public-private partnership. All alerts are made on an advisory level, and we do want to point to a legal framework somewhere. So I'd say that is one of the main challenges for tech against terrorism.
I'm Erin Sullivan from UCT. I have a question because you all mentioned there's this nexus point if you're going to do interventions between the online and the offline. And I wondered in all your projects where some considerations were about ethics of what type of partners you would or wouldn't take on as NGOs or as where you're redirecting people towards, who your target audiences are, and maybe the criteria used to target those audiences. I've got American lungs, but if you can't hear me, I'm sorry. So again, ethics on kind of who you would take on as partners, how you address target audiences who could be vulnerable as well as at risk in and of themselves, and the criteria used, as well as just language used to target individuals, because sometimes you have to test around what's going to be shocking if you kind of reach out to someone online being like, we think you're an extremist, and that can be a little bit jolting. So maybe any considerations in some of the ways you've seen programs set up or that you considered setting up programs that would take those audiences and partnerships into considerations ethically.
Take that one. So I think credibility is extremely important. I think in terms of how we, work, the kind of organizations that we are working, Csos that we are working with, needs to have credibility within the community of people that we are targeting. So the redirect program, for example, often we work with formers because they tend to understand the landscape the best. They tend to understand the language the best. They also tend to understand the psyche the best. And I see, so generally we have worked with them. But obviously, we have our own internal due diligence process, just to make sure that these organizations do not have any problems. There's no tax fraud and all that kind of stuff, which is the most basic things that I think most organizations, most outfit will undertake. I think the second is that it is extremely important when you talk about language, for example, that there is a certain localization of that, right? So, for example, again, the redirect program, the language that we use, tends to be different because there are cultural nuances, right? So when we were looking at launching the redirect in Pakistan, for example, certain words like dangerous just didn't come out right in Urdu, right? And so we had to change that a little bit, and the language that is very much appropriated within that cultural context. And I think at the end of it, when it comes to language, it also depends on what is the aim, because the redirect program has a dimension of trying to intervene at a very early or mid sort of level interventions. But also, I think there is a level of us wanting to tell people who are really bad actors who want to abuse the platform for bad things, that we are doing something, right? There is a certain level of us telling them, hey, you know what, don't use our platform. There is that messaging that is subtle, but also aim at trying to get people off the platform, if they want to do something bad.
I can follow on that. Thanks, Aaron. I think it's a really good question. I think, firstly, it's about making ethics central to everything you do in the program design, having appropriate checkpoints at certain parts of the design, making sure there's ethical oversight, ideally independent, and also building in the right quality assurance processes as well, acknowledging that local SMEs are often best placed to advise on that. And I think when working with local partners, the first thing is the selection process, ensuring you have the right criteria there so you can select an appropriate organization. And it might be an organization that has no previous experience with violent extremism or whatever harm you're looking to reach with regards to the audience, but they may have certain other skills that really are a good fit, and you can help to build their capacity to actually meet the needs of that audience. And then building in appropriate safeguards like risk assessments at the appropriate points, risk escalation protocols, having a system where perhaps first of all everything's done online, but then you might have a pathway that allows for certain individuals to receive offline support as well. So I think it's just about considering that at every point and having the do no harm principle at the heart of everything you do. Audience messaging, for example, like you mentioned, the last thing you want to do is to be aggressive in the counter messaging with an interventions program. I think you want to, at all points, try and lower the barriers to entry across the pathway, so you can leverage and broker that interaction with the service, not do any harm and not push people back towards the harm they were potentially engaging with in the first place. And I think that's where we found success with some of our sort of emotion-based themed messages. So looking to really speak to the individuals in question on their underlying grievances and the vulnerabilities and perhaps the emotions they feel around their situation and the context they find themselves in, rather than a messaging around a particular ideology. So, yeah, thanks.
Can I just add really quickly? I'm not sure if this should be an ethical question, but I think that there's a bit of a dilemma when it comes to some of the credible voices that Noah mentioned when they look for funding. So a lot of donor organizations are a bit hesitant to fund these reintegration initiatives because they're not really sure what they're going to be using the money for, or what the outcome's going to be down the road. But the people that have been in the movement are the most credible, really. Those are the most credible voices. And some of the work that the De Bintel Foundation are doing does seem genuinely impactful. But I know that they don't have donor organizations lining up to support them, which is a shame. And I'd hope that anyone with funding could be a little bit bolder, perhaps, and take a few chances on people like them.
Well, how about this? I will throw out a question just from Aaron's last question. So, speaking to someone that was involved in online communication for an extremist organization, they made a very strong comment that stays with me about countering extremist communication, content, etc. And their comment was, at the point where people are already involved in the communication, whether it's speaking to other community members in what we would call extremist communities online, or even retweeting propaganda or reposting propaganda, was that these individuals are already deep enough in that anything you do is really not going to sway their minds. And I mean, it's a strong comment, and we can either believe it or not, but I kind of wanted to hear your opinions from this panel, because we have amazing people from lots of different sectors. So let's hear your thoughts on that.
So I think this is where the impact and measurement, sort of aspect of these programs become extremely important. And I don't think this is an area where, as an industry, not just not talking about the tech industry, but the larger sort of CVE industry, as Cameron, you mentioned earlier, that it is easy to measure, right? Or that, in fact, that is often put into a proposal or a call for proposal often, because in a lot of ways we want to do programs because we are making an effort it shows that we're making an effort to do it. But I think this is where measurement and impact comes in, and I think when what we have seen with many of the programs, we started internally understanding the patterns or what happens, for example, if somebody they don't click through to the resources of our partners in Search Redirect. We know that this program has its strength and obviously works. With the other programs, it's more qualitative in nature, so it's a lot more. It's a lot harder to measure, but what we have seen, for example, is how before and after, right? How an organization organize their content on Facebook, on Instagram, and what happens after that. We can see that there is a huge change. Normally, after the first workshop and the second workshop, we do some reviews with the CSOs that we work with, and often they report to us about an increased search. More people are following their content, and they are reaching out to people that they want to reach out to. So I think, obviously, groups like this would want to say that it doesn't quite work. But I think, especially at the early as well as mid-levels of interventions, I think it is extremely important, and it does work.
I think for us it's a bit different because obviously we don't really engage with the people behind the content, if that makes sense. We look at the terrorist content and then we work with the tech companies to try and get it offline. But I think mixing it with the ethics question, I think it's very interesting to hear from your side in terms of what the analysts do with intervention, because our sort of open source intelligence protocol is that we don't engage. So we're like passive observers. So we only follow around links. And obviously we're quite good at looking and basically seeing, it's like a cat and mouse game where one channel shuts down or we try and get it shut down. And then we hop to another one. So we basically follow along, but we don't engage because of legal reasons, first of all. And second of all, ethically, we're trying to think through, what if we join a channel where there's a very long question list where you have to provide answers to like an ideology or show your ideological conviction. And for us, we're trying to think, would that potentially help someone else radicalize? Or would it potentially, if a group chat has 55,000 people, does that number just make someone think, well, there's 55,000 people that believe this, it must be true? I'm not saying that we have the right answers, and obviously we are missing some of this like open source intelligence knowledge or intel that we can't access because of it. So that is kind of the difference that we have, but it's been very interesting learning from you, and obviously in order to intervene at that level, you will have to engage. So yeah, but that is kind of our standpoint.
Yeah, thank you. It's a really interesting question. I think I would gently push back on the premise of it. I think we don't often know the situation the individuals that we're seeking to provide an interventions for. All we can do is take account of that. There's a potential situation, design programs to try and reach people across the board, and that might be people who are just starting to engage with VE material, or people who've spent some time in these spaces and perhaps are sharing, propagating it. It obviously it's much more difficult to do, I would say, generally speaking, on closed spaces where people are perhaps much more engaged, and you'll find a lot of online interventions programs are on the bigger, more open platforms of publicly available data, and you could perhaps say, well, they're more likely to reach people at the early part of a journey, or perhaps engaging at a different stage. But I don't think we can rule out reaching those people and their moments of self-doubt. And for some people, they may never have had an opportunity to engage with an intervention service, especially in this way on platforms that they use. And sometimes, this is a hard problem, and you have to acknowledge that you're going to ultimately reach very few people. But even if you can just reach a few effectively, that's going to make a difference. So, yeah.
Thank you. Just so everyone knows, I love playing the devil's advocate just because I feel like it makes us think about things slightly differently or even counter it. Any luck with Shiri by any chance?
No, we've not.
No? Okay. Okay, if she ever appears, we will give her her time. But with that being said, we are going to open up the questions to the audience. So please raise your hand and introduce yourself. There is a microphone that will be passed around. And yes, open to the floor now.
Thank you. So my name is Marco-Andrea Argentino. I'm a research fellow at ICSR. I guess I'm going to go after Meta first. You mentioned that your partner in the UK is Exit UK. Would you just be able to mention who your other partners are and what country they're in? And maybe elaborate a little bit on your relationships and some of the outcomes potentially of your interactions with them.
So it's very specific to me, so shall I just take that, or are you going to take a bunch of questions? Okay. So for the United States, it's Life After Hate. The Germany is Violence Prevention Network. Pakistan is the Shaur Foundation. Australia is Exit Australia. Actually, we are about to. It's Exit Australia for now. That's going to change in a few months' time. What did I miss? Life After Hate for the United States. Did I say that already? Yeah. Indonesia, Ruang Ngobrol for Indonesia, right, which is the organization that Cameron was talking about earlier. And in terms of the relationship, what aspect of it? So, okay, how are we conducting sort of so this is their program, and the way we look at it is that we are supporting them, in terms of the program. What happens is every 2 years we have Moonshot coming in to do a review, and to basically, and this review is available online. It's we post it on all our on the Counter Speech website, but also all over like our newsroom posts and so on. So the idea of it is to allow us to have an independent, organization to really assess where the strengths, weaknesses, and where we can improve for the program. Moonshot also helps us out in terms of, identifying, when we go through the process of identifying the right CSOs. Moonshot obviously has the expertise to be able. This is a program that they co-created. And so we bring them in to help us with that assessment on whether this organization has the right, the capacity to implement this program. What are the strengths and weaknesses? Where they might need to come in to do certain interventions. How should the landing page look like? So we get Moonshot to help us with that. Now, we have a quarterly review with the CSOs itself. And again, the idea of this is to find out where we can come in and assist them. As I've said, we don't believe that we should be fronting many of these programs or that we should be owning even these programs. What we want to do is really help CSOs that are already doing the work and get them better. If they are at level 5, let them go to level 10, essentially. And the other thing that we're doing this year, which is slightly different, is that we are organizing a workshop to bring all of our partners together. Part of it is that we launched this program in 2019, and then COVID happened, so we had to launch Exit UK, the UK and the Pakistan program virtually. We couldn't, we did some engagement later on in person in the UK and Pakistan. But the challenge really is around COVID, and so finally we are at a point where most of us don't have to put on the mask, and we can come together and really understand strengths, weaknesses, similarities between challenges in the far right extremist space, Islamist extremist space, and we want to also create the network for the CSOs to be able to interact and and build that community of CSOs working on the program.
How much time do we have left after our technical difficulties? Perfect.
Hi, thanks everybody. Brodie McDonald, doctoral student at Oxford. I had a question that builds on what Chelsea said, her colleague had mentioned around, does this actually work and can we actually make a difference when you have genuinely bad actors who are very set in their ways? One of the things that Yannick has done some research on recently is the impact of not just giving them counter messages, because there's lots of people doing that already, but also providing them with a community and with mental health support. And so I wonder, for Mike and Nawab and Cameron in particular, maybe you can speak to whether you've seen or you're doing anything around providing mental health support and community services for these people who are so deep in it.
I know this gentleman right here on the end raised his hand right at the same time, so maybe we can ask your question. We can sort of try to answer both of them as quickly as possible.
Thank you so much. My name is Mohammed Al-Raweli, PhDing at the University of Sheffield on ISIS religious ideology. My question is, talking about Islamist groups, is talking about too many Islamic concepts. So in terms of once these Islamic concepts have been identified and collected, so what is the next process? And how we are going to make sure those analyses will be free or not be radicalized from the content? Can you just talk a bit on this? Thank you.
I'll have to take the first one. So I think certainly we have and we do provide mental health type support for some individuals, but we're very conscious that we're not saying that individuals have mental ill health necessarily. What we will do is partner with organizations that provide psychosocial support, and that might go down that route if it's deemed appropriate, because everything's on an individualized basis anyway with the person if they choose to engage with. So certainly possible, but not sort of central to a program design about this is a mental health program, because I think that would be wrong-headed. But it can be within scope on an individualized basis.
How do you do that, though, when it's necessary?
So I think it's about choosing the right partner, ensuring that they have the capacity to deliver that support, and I'm acknowledging that it's almost always going to be online support in the first instance, with the challenges of them taking it offline. And often the providers themselves have expertise of a mental health background, perhaps professional psychologists or psychiatrists can counsellors, psychosocial support. Often there's a spectrum that they can provide and deliver that on a needs basis. And in terms of, measuring whether it works, I think that's something that we're constantly looking to see how we can do better. And something we've tried and we continue to try is building in behavioural change measurement approaches, especially when individuals interact with the service, and if we can do pre and post measurement there, then we try to do that, acknowledging that it is very difficult, and I think it's a challenge across the sector, and anyone involved in interventions is having that long-term measurement to gauge impact.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question about mental health and creating new communities and new social networks for people when they disengage. In Indonesia, this is beginning to happen, absolutely. A few years ago, dozens or hundreds of women and children came back from Turkey after having failed to enter the caliphate, and they were put into shelters run by the Ministry of Social Affairs in Jakarta, and they had no experience with violent extremists, really. They were used to tackling other issues altogether. And so they brought in the Counterterrorism Agency, but mostly civil society organizations with experience in PCVE, and they worked a lot with some of the social workers. So progress has certainly been made there in Indonesia, and I know that it's a big part of what countries in Europe are doing, but I think it's an excellent point and something that needs to progress further, for sure.
I'm not sure I understand. Are you saying, how can one not be radicalized from looking at the content of Islamist groups? Is that what you're saying?
Once you are in the process of analyzing and collecting these and reading the contents, so how are we going to make sure you are not being affected as a researcher?
Well, I spent, in my previous life as an academic, I spent many years of my life studying a group called the Hizb ut-Tahrir, particularly the chapters in Indonesia. I don't know, but I wasn't radicalized. And if anything, it impacts you. So when I see the word caliphate, I feel very nauseated, because it's like, 7 to 8 years of my life looking at the concept of the caliphate and reading what it all is about. And I don't want to see any more. Like, the word caliphate just gives me a headache, right? And the word Hizb ut-Tahrir as well gives me a bit of a headache, because that's what I was doing for many years of my life. So I think when we undertake that sort of journey to study a particular group or a particular ideology, I think it is driven by academic interest and wanting to, and often I think there's always a consistent, your methodological approach. I was very conscientious of the fact that my identity obviously is going to impact the quality of the research, and I was maybe extra conscious, and I always step back to make sure that the way I'm doing this is in the fairest way possible, right? Because being a Muslim, you don't like groups like this, because you think that it has impacted, the good name of your religion, and so you tend to have a stronger view when it comes to writing up aspects of what they do, but at the same time you need to be fair. I mean, you need to really carry this out in the best way possible. So that's my best answer, I'm not sure. But there are many academics here who are still in academia, so they're probably going to be able to answer you better.
Can I add to the question, if that's all right? Because I find it a really interesting question. Actually, when we were doing a presentation for the Prevent Network in the UK, they asked us the same question. They were like, how do you not get radicalized? And to be honest, the first time I got the question, I was a bit stunned. I didn't know what to say. But in terms of, I think our organization is making good steps in terms of support. So we've got therapy, basically, for everyone who works on open source intelligence, where they know what we do. They also work with the police, and they basically, they help us, first of all, deal with the mental health effects of just having to see very graphic content or narratives, and I think it's very good that we get to talk that through. But they are also obviously, looking for warning signs in terms of like, are we sad? Are we getting angry? I think an identity is a very, very important, and Maura Conway has done a great study on this, on ethics in this area. And she also features identity. And for me, for example, it's way harder to look at far-right terrorist content or incel content. Far right, I think, because I can see my identity, being guilty of partaking in that. For incel content, it's because I'm a woman, it's very hard to look at this. And for Islamist, because it seems far away from me, I deal with that better. But I think there's so much more we can do in terms of focusing on that. I think more research needs to be done on it. And I think there's great, I think obviously GNET has done a panel on mental health, which is obviously great. But I think the question of identity is very important, and I think we can do much more on that. And I think especially for young female academics that have to deal with this and the potential threat it poses, I'm aware of a few friends that have been affected really badly, and I've seen the effect it has, and I think we need to be really concerned, and I think there needs to be more attention to it. So I think it's a great question, so I just wanted to add.
How about collective votes, like this?
Sorry?
Once, the rest of my question, once these, let's say, contents, have been identified,
Yeah.
so, okay, now we have, a list of Islamic concepts, so is there any next step, analysis behind this?
Of the ideological, of the content itself?
The content.
Yeah, so for us it's very important to, first of all, because we're mostly focused with the TCAP on just identifying it and trying to take it down, but that is why we want to do the archive, because obviously we are seeing, we see the content, but it is so much. It can be, up to 3,000 URLs a month. We can't analyze all of that content, so we need all of the academics in the room to basically help us do that. And for us, we do we do trend reports and kind of the threat online, and we try and look behind it. But yeah, it's basically too much content for us to analyze. So we want to make sure that it's accessible for everyone. And I think also the TCAP is a bit narrow is in the fact that we now have, we have the Taliban, which is more Deobandi, but the rest of the groups are all Sunni Islam. So we also want to make sure that we are more, that we're also going to focus on Shia extremism and basically, think through these things and be aware of that. So yeah, we do look at it, and obviously as I lead the research team, so the whole year I basically come up with new projects, and if anyone would like to partner or is interested in something, then please do let us know, because we just have a lot of data and we need people to help us go through it.
To wrap it up, I will just say I think something we all need to keep in mind is we're talking about online, and yes, the online world and the content does play a big part in all of this and extremism, but the offline connections, whether they're family, friends, institutions, is still so strong, and research is showing that. So we need to remember that the offline world has its space, but the online world has its space, but the offline world also has a huge impact. And with that being said, I want to thank our fantastic panel of speakers, as well as GNET, and and thank you to our virtual viewers for hopefully staying with us through the technical difficulties, and have a nice morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are.
And thank you for sharing.
Thank you.